Hello, I'm Dr. Sandal, founder of Atma Clinic. The modern medical system is falling apart. To fix it, we need to change how we think about health, illness, and the practice of medicine. Welcome to the show, Talking Shift, where we discuss radical new perspectives on health, illness, and the practice of medicine. Joining me today is Becky Kasenberg. She is a longtime yoga practitioner and current yoga teacher. She focuses much on the deeper aspects of yoga. Like we talked about in our last segment, yoga is, yes, the asanas, but it is also an entire philosophical system that includes a lot of really valuable, powerful processes like pranayama, and the topic of today's chat, Yoga Nidra. Becky, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course.
I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about Yoga Nidra.
So tell me and the audience a little bit about what Yoga Nidra is, and we'll kind of dig in and play with the idea and
Sure.
talk about how people might try this and what benefit they might get from it.
Sure. Usually when Yoga Nidra is given that little blurb, it's a practice of conscious relaxation. And it ends up being a system that we move through as a meditation, and it allows the body to relax. And so in our practice, when we say relax, we can think of things we do to relax, such as take a walk, read a book, listen to music. And usually those are things we're doing. In Yoga Nidra, we are learning to release tension from the body. So we lie down and go through a series of practices that someone guides you. You're just listening with a trace of awareness, and it allows the physical body to release tension, the mental body, and the emotive body to release. And so when we talk about asana practice or the postures, you're lying in Shavasana, which is the corpse pose, but then the body begins to become still, and we can take our awareness over the body through the systematic practice.
I've always thought of it as, and I've heard this term used before, yogic sleep. And it's a really fascinating process. Anybody who hasn't done this before, I highly recommend it, because it teaches us so much about how our body is distinct from our consciousness. Because what happens in Yoga Nidra is that the body essentially reaches this really deep sort of sleep state. And yet the consciousness is still active. And I always found that very compelling. You know, it's an experience of our consciousness outside of the typical. And for many people, an experience like Yoga Nidra is a really cool stepping stone on their spiritual journey, because they have a direct experience of, I might not be my body. And it's like, oh, that's a really interesting exploration.
Yes, because in the practice, the physical body does move into a state of sleep, but the consciousness remains aware. And if you've studied yoga at all, we look at the human form that there are different layers or sheaths. And so we can move our diagnosis of our practice through the physical body, and then the pranic or energy body, and then through the mental body, and then even through the body of the intelligence. And so it's allowing, as we're relaxing, all of the different systems to integrate in a harmonious way. So when we talk about health or wholeness of the body, allowing it to relax and working through our different systems, such as the endocrine system, the reproductive system, the respiratory system, or circulatory system, all of those are given a chance just to move in the way that they are naturally meant to move.
In medicine, mainstream medical approaches really focus on trying to fix disasters. One of the things that I like about the bigger picture of yoga, as you've described it, is that it's more about hygiene. You know, it's analogous to flossing. It's like, you want to floss your body, you want to floss your nerves, you want to floss your energetic body, you want to, and that just means that you're going through this process of engaging with those and checking in, and hey, is everything great? Do I need to do something else? I really like Yoga Nidra and trance-like practices like that. as a way to provide a particular tool for people. I like to think about these things as, how can someone engage in it? When would they use this? And one of the things that I've often recommended Yoga Nidra for is people with sleeping issues. Mm-hmm. Do you ever teach people specifically around that?
I do, and usually when I consult individually, primarily it's dealing with anxiety issues, healing issues, or sleep issues. Mm-hmm. And so what's nice about the practice is that when we relax, it helps us have a good night's sleep. Mm-hmm. And we can also work with our Sankalpa, that short positive statement that we set in the beginning and ending of Yoga Nidra practice, to start developing better sleep habits, such as I could set something that said, I sleep soundly for 8 hours at night.
And that's a Sankalpa.
And that's
an intention.
It's that intention or resolve, mm-hmm. that positive statement that we plant based on what I need to develop that supports and nourishes my sleep. And usually when we work with Yoga Nidra to help people sleep better at night, we start to notice what habits they have prior to sleep, so what they're doing before bedtime, and then can develop adding a little bit of Nidra practice before moving into bed, but starting to shut down technology early, turning the phone off, moving, what do you have in your bedroom? Because to practice Yoga Nidra, we advise not having your phone by your head. Move your cell phone away. Take off your watch. Take off your Fitbit. Move the electronics. Same in your sleep. Mm-hmm. When you're preparing your bedroom for sleep, you want to try to move those energies away from you. And as you practice Yoga Nidra, it helps you look at, is it my physical body that's causing more disturbance in sleep? Or is it from my breathing? Or is it emotion that I haven't cleared from the day or done something to address before bed? That's really big.
I think most people who have trouble sleeping, any form of insomnia, whether it's trouble falling asleep or trouble staying asleep, there's always the question, well, where is this coming from? Is this a physical agitation? Is it a mental agitation? And oftentimes I find that when I ask people that, they haven't thought about that yet. It's not really in our culture to ask that sort of question. People are just like, I can't sleep. Like, okay, well, let's kind of get into the nitty-gritty here. And you're saying that Yoga Nidra is a tool to ask that question.
It is.
To check in and feel for that, and then give that a bit of a scrub and a rub. And
Exactly. So I will say, we go through the systematic practice, and at the very end, when you're finished and you come back up to your seated position, when we practice together, we review what we just explored. So from the first part of the practice where you rotate consciousness over the body, I ask specifically, is there an area that felt hard for you to connect with, or that you wanted to spend more time with? Because usually, like, when you go back and think about it, like, I wanted to spend more time when you mentioned the liver or the kidney or the brain or my right arm. And
kind of an intuitive ping.
Right,
like, okay,
and it's like, why don't you pay attention to that this week and see what comes to you related to that area? And then sometimes what happens is we rotate consciousness over the body and people start to relax and are nearing that state of sleep, because you move from your waking consciousness through the state between sleep and try not to drop into dream or into deep sleep. But you come in and out, and you might notice, like, oh, I can move quickly through this part, but when we come to the breathing, working with the prana or the energy of the body, I have some, like, the mind starts to wander there. Or in our systematic practice, if you don't mind, I'll just tell you what those areas are, and then you'll kind of see, oh, I can see how you point out, or people can see, where am I having difficulty holding my attention or remaining relaxed. So when we practice Yoga Nidra, we spend time preparing our space, and lying down and making sure the body feels supported and warm, and then we ask the body not to move. And so when we first practice, of course the body's going to want to move. Oh, I have an itch, and it's fine, but we notice those things, and then over time that tends to calm down. We set
floss it,
exactly,
move through
keep
it,
practicing. And then we set our Sankalpa. That is our positive statement of something we want to nourish or support in our life. And then we rotate the consciousness over the body. So that first practice is guided through the right side, the left side body, touch on some organs. And I suggest if you're working with an organ that has illness, you can look beforehand at pictures of healthy organs. So when I name that, right, you can imagine something healthy. Because I'm sure you're familiar with people who have illness. We like to look up everything about the illness and what it looks like. But let's spend our attention looking at a healthy lung or a healthy brain.
Yeah, that's wisdom. Yeah, much of our society ends up getting over medicalized, and that's a sort of fear-based orientation, and we follow our consciousness. So if our consciousness is fearful, we end up in a place that is defensive or constricted. And so I love that, setting that positive intention. Some people feel that sort of thing is hokey, and they're like, what do you mean positive intentions? But we all accept that the placebo effect is a real thing. It comes from something. And the bottom line there is that we know that our consciousness affects our biology. It's just not something that is perfectly illuminated in the science yet. But we know that it's a real thing. And heck, guys, it doesn't cost you anything to try a positive affirmation. So, we can, even if we're skeptics, we can swallow our pride and run the experiment and say, okay, let me set a Sankalpa, a positive statement for myself, and try this.
Yeah, for example, when I began studying with Yogi Charu, our homework was to wake up an hour before sunrise. So I set that as a Sankalpa until I could naturally wake up an hour before sunrise. And yeah, it works, but you have to do the experiment, like you said, to try it out. And so we start small with something like I walk outdoors every night at sunset or every evening at sunset. Something that I can see manifest. Or if I'm trying to change my eating habit, I'm not going to try to change everything at once. I may say, I eat vegetables at lunch. Something that allows me to add in, and you'll notice when, I'm not eating vegetables at lunch, it's like, it's starting to pop, and I really need to eat.
Literally just by the process of you paying attention to it, it starts to manifest.
It starts to manifest.
So carry on walking us through that process. Sorry to derail you.
So that's all right. So we had this Sankalpa, and then we're rotating consciousness over the body. So it's really important that you made that point about your consciousness. Your awareness is with that consciousness. And if I put my consciousness on my knee, that's where my focus is. And if I'm starting to relax, I'm able to move a focused and a very gently concentrated awareness over my body. And the body begins to relax. And that's based on an ancient yogic practice called nyasa, but it's moving systematically over the body. And then there's a short pause, and we move on to the breath. So hopefully the first section has allowed people to relax. If I know that we're working with a specific organ or body system, I can incorporate that into that part of the practice. But that'd be more like an individualized practice for someone. So we move then into the breathing. And so in our yoga sutras, we're taught the 8 limbs of yoga. And the first 2 are yama and niyama, which have to do with our behaviors externally and internally. And then we have asana. So we're in the practice of Shavasana, and then pranayama, which is working with our breathing and then the subtle energies. So when we move into the next part of our practice, we connect with our physical breath, and then it begins to go deeper and deeper because we're
Layers.
relaxed and we're starting then to breathe through the subtle body. So in the practice that I learned from Yogi Charu, we count the breath backward, and we can count from 27 to 1, maybe 54 to 1, maybe 108 to 1. It depends how long you have to practice, and if you have newer students, I usually count a shorter amount of time. But
it's a challenge just keeping focus through that process initially.
It is, and we begin connecting our awareness to the breath and then sensitizing our mind just a little bit by noticing, the breath is slightly cooler on the inhale, slightly warmer on the exhale, as energy from the body, the heat from the body is leaving. And we feel the breath at the nostrils and then draw it down into the navel and begin counting our breath there. And if we have a longer practice, we may count at the chest also. But that practice is one that I tend to fall asleep in. So I like to use it if I wake up in the night and the mind is rapid. I can move into counting my breath and go back to sleep.
I'm fond of saying that awareness or consciousness is the root of our health. And everything you're describing there is just a process. It's a practice. It's a structure for building that awareness. For saying, hey, I'm going to take conscious control of this, and I'm going to move this through this limb. I'm going to build awareness of how my breath feels. All of those things are a beautiful practice. And I feel like our society is trending more towards abstraction and unconsciousness and less towards integration and awareness. When we engage in a practice like Yoga Nidra and people are going through all of this, I think for a lot of people it's totally alien at first, right? They're like, first of all, there's skepticism. Like, that's just hocus pocus. And it's interesting that that's the initial response because it's not offensive. There's nothing about that that's unreasonable or even really outside of people's regular experience if they're being honest. But culturally, we have this sort of hard-nosed scientism where people are like, we're our bodies, we're machines, our awareness is some emergent property of our nervous system. And all of that leads to a devaluing of the power of consciousness. But the reality is that, first of all, we are consciousness inhabiting a body. And we can experience that. We can experience the power of our consciousness. And I love that you are walking people through this practice. It's literally just like a basketball player, practices their layup, or they practice the flip at the very end of their shot, and they're like, okay, that's not right, let me practice that. When people see athletes do things that are near superhuman, they acknowledge that. They go, oh, that's really working. Obviously, Michael Jordan just did that.
Right.
Well, how did he get there? He got there through applying consciousness rigorously, repeatedly, until his body would do the things that he asked it to do.
Yes.
And, Michael Jordan was a yogi, right? Because he was practicing this awareness and getting his system to follow his lead.
Yes.
And the more that we do that in our own lives, if we have an ill organ or if we have something that isn't quite right and it niggles at us and we're just like, I've got this thing that's, I've got a cranky shoulder or whatever. Always the first step to health is to pay attention to that. Why is my shoulder cranky? When is my shoulder cranky? What have I done to my shoulder to make it cranky? When people come to see me for a consultation, that's a lot of the early detective work. Is just helping them build their consciousness around an issue. And then they start to become empowered around that. They go, oh, you know what? Actually, if I don't do that, my shoulder doesn't hurt. Like, okay, well, cool. That's a great starting place. Try not doing that for a week, and then let's meet again and see what happens. And I'm like, it's fixed. Or, okay, I've learned a lot. I think it's definitely in here. Like, okay, now we can take the next step. But I love that this Yoga Nidra practice is it's a form that people can follow to build that awareness, to practice bringing awareness to their physicality. And it's hard to overstate how powerful that really is.
Yeah, I agree, especially with counting your breath backward and noticing how often the mind wanders away, or you repeat the same number over and over.
Yeah.
And there's not a reason, we don't have to define a reason why, it's just something we do. But part of the instruction is if you lose count or the mind wanders, you start again. Start again at 27.
The beatings will continue until morale improves.
Exactly. You reach one, begin again at 27. And so, until the practice is through.
It's almost like a martial art. I'm thinking of a Shaolin practice, right? It's like, again. But when we do that, this is an extension of that same idea. People don't realize that they have control over a cranky shoulder. It's even more rare that people realize they have control over a wandering mind. A practice like this, pranayama or yoga nidra, is deeply therapeutic for people who have issues with attention, attention deficit disorders, for instance, people who feel that they can't focus on a task. Practice. It is under our control to practice. And not to say that it's, all in the mind. There's also neurochemistry and biochemistry that plays into that. But it never hurts to practice something, to get every advantage we can in an issue. And I think of anxiety being very, very similar. Anxiety, again, neurochemical and biochemical, there's layers to all of that. But certainly at least part of that is that we are stuck in a short circuit. And if we bring awareness to that and challenge that and say, okay, where am I feeling that? What's happening with that? And we walk through a process to engage with it like you're describing. Deeply therapeutic. Not always the entire answer, but it's always part of the answer.
And it gives confidence that you are able to change.
Yeah.
You're able to change a pathway of thought.
Yeah.
You're able to call the mind back.
Yeah.
Gently call it back and continue from where we are. That's important. Someone reminding you, call it back.
Yeah.
Because maybe no one told you for years.
Right.
Pause and breathe. Bring your awareness back to the body.
I love that the yoga system makes a distinction between the mind and the intelligence. I think that's incredibly useful information. The mind being the puppy dog that's after every squirrel and shiny object. It's automatic. This, that, this, that, this, that, this, that, this, that. And that can answer to the intention, the intelligence, the decider. I want to focus on this. Not that. This. Not that. And it's literally training that puppy dog. Every time we make a conscious decision to focus in on something and to keep our awareness narrowed in, rather than looking for every threat, which is often why the mind is accidentally in that pattern of being all over the place. Deeply empowering.
Right. When we say that, we're moving from the sympathetic nervous system into parasympathetic. So that's how the mind is starting to release tension too, starting to quiet down. So we've done our Sankalpa, rotation of consciousness through the physical body, or pranayama. The next area is called hatha, for hatha yoga, and we know hatha, sun, moon. So we're looking at opposites or dualities, the dualities that exist in the universe, the dualities that exist in our body. And for this part of the practice, we specifically ask the participant to feel maybe heaviness in the body or lightness in the body, heat in the body or cold in the body. Sometimes if we've been working together a while, we'll do an expansion and then bring it back. So you have a feeling of large and small. And if you're interested in working on things such as sadness and joy, we can do that. But usually that's not something we touch in the beginning, but it is something if you want to explore in the future.
Cool.
That you can look at those opposites. But
so you're kind of quieting down through the layers, and this is reaching that emotional layer. getting into, okay, great, the body's quiet, the breath is now quiet, now we're getting into the more subtle layers.
Right, and in the physical body, it's actually starting to balance the left and right hemisphere of the brain.
Makes sense.
And when we talk about meditation, we know from the left and right nostril that Sushumna path is that central, very subtle pranic or nadi in the body, the channel, and that's where it's allowing us to move into or notice maybe I'm more active in the right or left hemisphere. It's not right or wrong. We're just noticing, oh, I could access the heaviness easier than lightness, or heat easier than cold, or neither one. But that's our next practice. And then there's sometimes after that a piece I'll put in where we look at our current activity of the day, but we move from the moment I woke up this morning, or I'm sorry, I move from the current moment at the start of Yoga Nidra back to the beginning of the day.
Unwinding it.
It's unwinding it, and I can notice later, were there any areas I was stuck on, or I felt a lot of emotion there, or, was I able to pass through? And I knew during the day I felt a lot of emotion here, but in my relaxed state, I just looked at it and then came back to the present moment. So that's a piece sometimes will fit in, but if you think about the emotive body, it's helping to clear that activity of the day. Right.
Floss it.
Right.
Clear it.
Clear it up. So then the next section of practice, because in our Yoga Sutras, we've moved from Pranayama to Pratyahara, where we're starting to draw our senses of perception inward. And during this whole practice, we're starting to draw our senses inward. And so the next section is called Dharana. So we're really working with a focus. And our focus can be with the senses themselves. So this is where the visualization comes in. And we may do a visualization that engages each of the senses very clearly. We may do a visualization where we go to a pleasant environment or have an activity. The one I use a lot is the healing temple, which, because I personally like that.
Cool.
We go into a temple and then we allow our body to feel the energy and let it heal, give it the space that it needs to heal. Sometimes we go on a journey to a village or something, but it's allowing that visualization to come in, and it's dharana, creating that focus. It's gentle, but it's holding a focus through visualization. Now, some people visualize easy, and some have more of a sense perception by hearing something, and it's not right or wrong. We just work with what our talents are in our own bodies.
So we're just dropping deeper and deeper down towards that body being asleep, the mind being conscious, flossing, scrubbing, doing hygiene on things.
Exactly, and touching, more emotion maybe touched here. And so after that section, it's Dharana 2, where we look rapid. It's called rapid images. And I'll just say an image or an item, an object that I ask you to visualize, and it moves from one to the next. And depending who's in the room, sometimes the objects are related and sometimes they're random. But a lot of times it's objects from our day, but it can trigger things from the past. And so if I'm relaxed, that object comes and I just move from one to the next.
It's kind of a practice in focusing and releasing.
Exactly. Like calling to mind, let it go, one to the next.
Cool.
And we notice again on any of these times when the mind wanders, it's fine. But we just start to notice, oh, I dropped into sleep here. So after that section, we move to what's called Shakshi Bhav. So we're moving into our Dhyan, or what's called meditation, but it's not actually something we're doing at that point. It's something that happens, and we're just noticing. It's witnessing the mind space. So we'll ask.
Everything's off at that point.
Right. Everything has hopefully quieted down, and we're just allowing the awareness to rest in the mind space, noticing if there are thoughts, if it's quiet, what's going on, and you'll spend just a little bit of time noticing. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Charu always points out that it's the focused, concentrated mind that's a relaxed mind. And so we've given like all of this activity with our awareness, but moving through the different activities with the mind, and then we want to see, is it quiet? And that's how you said we can tell the awareness begins to look like at the mind. So it's that opportunity really to see what's happening with the heart space.
Then we can harness it.
We can look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting statement. I think a lot of people might find that to sound ironic, that a focused mind is a relaxed mind. For myself, when I hear that, it makes sense to me because I think about it in comparison. If the mind isn't calm and focused, if it isn't able to just gently attach to one thing at a time, it's doing a lot of work. Right? That's stressful, and I think a lot of people have that experience of the mind going all over the place. And if we can actually bring that in and focus that, then for that tissue or gland or organ, that is that relaxed state, even though it perhaps sounds like, oh, if I just let it do its own thing, it'll be relaxed. It's like, no, it's actually an anxiety. It's too all over the place. That's not its native state.
And if it's filled with the prana or the movement of energy, and then the mind's moving quickly. When we say focused and, focus, concentration, sometimes we have the idea, oh, it's intense. But, but it's a relaxed, gentle focus and gentle concentration that we can hold. And again, that comes with practice, practicing, learning what that focus feels like and the experience of it. And then holding it as the concentration, and then as that naturally arises for us, we're not really working at it anymore. We've learned what it is, that intelligence is awake and aware. Oh, this is it, and I can let just rest in natural awareness. That's
deeply powerful process. I think if anybody has the opportunity to check this out, I highly recommend it. Becky does teach classes at Homegrown. They are remote classes, so they're readily accessible. Let's say that if for some reason someone doesn't want to go through coming for the class and really getting in depth with it, how might they just play with this? Let's say they're a little skeptical and they're going, maybe I'll go to a class, but prove it to me first. What is a 5-minute exercise that people could do to dip their toes into the water with Yoga Nidra?
Sure, I would say practice setting up for your Yoga Nidra, where you're lying down in a comfortable, supported space, and you have a light cover on the body. You've removed the electronics from around you, unless you decide to listen to a pre-recorded practice. But come in and try out a Sankalpa. Look at the phase of life you're living right now, and what would you like to bring support to? Maybe it is, I wake up an hour before sunrise, or I wake up at 6 a.m., or I sleep for 8 hours at night. Whatever you'd like to add, but start working with your Sankalpa, and we'll just begin by setting that short positive statement, repeating it 3 times in the mind, and then allow the body to settle.
Cool.
And I would say easy to connect with the breath, and then just take your awareness over the body.
Just practice looking for a little bit.
Looking for a little bit is great.
It's great.
Yeah.
I love that. So anyone who is wrestling with anxiety or insomnia, medically speaking, those are 2 of the things that right away I'm like, Yoga Nidra is great for those. But because it's a practice that builds awareness in the body, any practice that does that is phenomenal for health generally. When we think about the limitations in mainstream medicine, one of the major things that needs to shift is people need to think about how to take power to heal themselves. What are practices that make us able to be whole and powerful and integrated, rather than relying on someone else to tell us how that is? A lot of that starts with investigation, right? We don't know how to get somewhere if we don't know where we're starting at. And so just digging in, and Yoga Nidra is this lovely, expansive practice to help us play around in that self-awareness.
Right. And so if you're working at home, it's easy to look at a picture of a healthy organ or a healthy body part or a picture of how you would like to move. And then lie down and you can visualize yourself in that place, or you have this healthy organ. And we also recognize that the mind, when we first start to look at the mind, it's not quiet.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
That's a good starting place, right? It's
right?
like, hey, I saw that.
I see the mind has a lot of movement. It's fine. That's why we practice, is to bring awareness to it. And over time, we learn that ability to allow the mind to quiet.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Becky, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And
for
everybody, you
having
guys
me.
can find Becky at Homegrown Yoga in Baldwin City.